Welcome to Molding Masculinity. I'm Tom, here with Philip today, and it's time for our uh tri-weekly, quad-weekly, I guess that's called monthly episode about fatherhood as an umbrella topic discussing our three previous topics. So, we've talked about body image issues, we've talked about the consumption of pornography, and we've talked about oh, what was the other thing? Safety. Like,
Safety, yeah.
and I think all, well, at least two of the three of these are something we both have a lot to say about, or at least I have a lot to say about. And we things that we have a lot of data about. I think safety we may even hit on more data this week than we did last time we talked about it. But let's start off. I'm thinking with body image issues. Do you agree?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
I'll say real quick on the topic of what to call it. Uh, that you're going to call it monthly, but the problem is if we really do it every 4 weeks, we're going to slowly drift until we have one that also occurs. We're gonna have at some point a month where we have two of them.
I think we already do because we like began in the middle of a month, so
Oh, maybe,
yeah,
yeah.
I think we already broke it, but it's okay.
Yeah,
Nobody really listens to one episode a week. You either listen
yeah,
to 4 episodes a week as a psychopath, or it takes you 4 weeks to get through an episode.
yeah. No. Um, so who knows?
This is the correct way to begin every podcast is by just trashing your listeners and calling them psychopaths.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Tommy, specifically Tommy, not me. Tommy wants you to know that if you binge listen to our podcast, he thinks you're a psychopath. I think you're great. I think you should keep listening to Molding Masculinity as much as possible. But Tommy is going to judge you. Just know that going in, it's fine.
Using judging as our segue, uh, body image issues. This is one that I have a lot of strong opinions about from my own upbringing, as is kind of the general way I direct this show. Or not direct, the way I push this show's direction is in talking about my own background. The root of most of my body image issues come from a situation of as a kid where I literally was super skinny just because that's like most kids, most people in my family are like really skinny. Like and I every single time I went to anybody's house, any grandmother's house, or just anybody, like any older adult met me at any point, there was always some kind of a phrase of, oh, we got to put some meat on those bones, or if you've been eating, you don't eat, you need food, we got to get you to, like, do something to put some muscle on your bones. Or there was always a comment about my body almost immediately.
Hmm.
And then as I got older, I did hit this weird little point in middle school, partly because I was on prednisone for a minute in middle school, where I did gain, like, I got kind of pudgy. And I felt that, like, yeah, that, like, I felt like, oh my God, like, oh, now I'm like, then I immediately felt uncomfortable with my body in the opposite direction. And whenever I would say anything about that, everybody around me would also, like, I think it was in a well-meaning way of like, oh no, you're not. Nah, you're skinny. You're skinnier than me. You're skinnier than so and so. You're skinny. And it created an absolute confusion in my brain to where, like, to this day, like at this point in my life today, I if I'm being honest, I have literally no concept of what my body size or shape is in form of any kind of relativity. Like, if you ask me whether I think I am skinny, overweight, or like healthy or muscular or anything, I literally don't know. I'm an amorphous blob in my own brain. That is my projection of my body.
In some ways, that might be preferable to some of the neuroses that can develop. But you know, obviously that's not super pleasant for other reasons. But like, yeah, speaking as someone who is, currently overweight, in a medical sort of definitionally term, like trying to keep things objectively speaking, um, and who is actively in the process of trying to eat better, improve my lifestyle type stuff. It's been an interesting conversation watching my son's reaction to this, both of them, but particularly my older one, who kind of has reached the stage in his development where he is kind of paying more attention to others. You know, early the first like few years of life, you know, you're in that, you know, very self-focused state. Uh, and my 5-year-old still a little bit in that, getting a little bit better, but my older one's noticing, and you know, he's asking a lot of like, um, well, he's not asking us questions so much as like he's sort of taking things that he sees about us and how we behave, and like focusing it on himself. And it's been interesting to try to navigate that because, for example, like we do Weight Watchers to track our, you know, things, and so we're wife and I are, you know, when we're doing planning for our meals on a given day, we're talking about, oh, I don't really want to go to, you know, X restaurant or eat X kind of food. It's worth a lot of points. And, you know, like I'm going later to meet some friends and I want to have some cushion there if everyone decides, let's get a pizza or something. You know, like, you know, we're trying to navigate our, you know, allocated sort of food budget, if you will. And, you know, my son picks up on that and is like, oh, how many points is, you know, this worth? How many points is this worth? And he's like, you know, because of course my son is a very mathematical mind, and he wants to like start calculating how many points he's intaking, and like we have to kind of direct that, or I've tried to direct that in a sense of like really focusing him in on the reason mommy and I are doing this is not because there's something wrong with us, or that like, or you know, or rather not necessarily that, but like the point is it's a health concern. You know, if we don't get control of our relationship with our food, then we will develop heart conditions, we'll develop problems that will make us, you know, not live as long, do that kind of stuff. And I try really hard to constantly frame it in that, to like let him know that like the reason to diet, the reason to do these things is not because you need to match a particular ideal. It's because there are known scientific objective things that are harmful or beneficial to one's health. And, you know, if you're consulting with your doctor and your doctor is saying, you know, it'd be healthier for you to be like this, or you're fine or whatever, then like that's fine. And, you know, I've have physicals and checkups and stuff, and he says, you know, hey, you know, your cholesterol's getting a little high. Hey, you know, you could probably eat a little bit better, lose some weight would be beneficial for your health. And it's not a matter of, wow, fatso, it's not very pleasant to look at you. It's purely a scientific thing of like, if you want to maximize or attempt to maximize your lifespan, this is a thing that you need to change. And we try to keep it framed in that way, specifically because I don't want him to start like looking at himself and looking at his food and thinking like, am I going to be fat? Like, am I going to be ugly in some way? And I don't want him to internalize that sort of, uh, because it could be very easy to twist it in that direction if we're not careful about how we talk about it. So we always try to talk about it in terms of medical benefits rather than like, obviously, you know, both of us want to like look good in a swimsuit or whatever, but not, but we try to keep the focus on the health benefits over, the aesthetic benefits.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of validity to that. I mean, I definitely directed some of my concepts of what was good well, I mean, yeah, like I think most of us when we're growing up, we pull these concepts of what is good physical health from the adults that are around us. And you know, there was a lot of elements of that. That was part of what made me often feel kind of insecure was there was this like focus on muscularity as defining masculinity and also size defining masculinity. And this is something you find in rural communities very commonly. In fact, just over the week, you know, from uh, after last episode, I ran into a one of these like alpha sigma male things. It was like an
Hmm.
ad for that, and it had this reference to like, buy one of our shirts, and they're only found in large sizes and above because we're alpha males. And it was that this kind of conceptuality that like you're not a man unless you are a large man just ingrained itself into my head so much as a kid because I was always smaller than everybody else, and I always was very aware that I was smaller than everyone else. So then hearing all these other grown adults talking about how their size defined their masculinity really fucked me up. Like, it had me convinced that I was never going to be able to be a masculine man. And it, I think, is also largely of what like directed me away from certain stereotypically masculine activities like,
Hmm.
well, like sports. I didn't get it, which also contributed to me not being a larger, like, not, putting on muscle and things, is like I didn't get involved in sports because I'm not I'm not man enough. Like, I'm not tough enough. I'm not masculine enough to be in sports, was what I had already kind of gotten pre-programmed into my head by watching the adults around me talking about how these things identified what it was to be a good human. And so I had it stuck in my head, oh, well, I'm not one of those, so I can't do what they do. And that was, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting in thinking about mine. Like, I did get into sports for a while, and not and getting out of them as I got older was actually a big contributor to my disconnect between my appetite and my body shape. Um, but it's interesting because like my parents tried me out at kind of everything initially. Early on, I did baseball, I did football. I never did soccer, weirdly, because a bunch of my cousins did soccer, but that was never something my parents did. But um, I just couldn't get into football. I think my um, I had a disconnect between what my brain liked about football and what my body was good at football. I was apparently very good at like getting in and tackling people or whatever. Like I was good at being a defensive, like sort of like line person. Because I had like a combination of like size and agility that let me be good at that. But what I like to do was run with the ball. And so that's not something you get to do very often playing defense. Um, so I never got into it. So I kind of got out of it in that early time. And so my sort of sport of choice going through a lot of my time as a child was baseball. And my mom did swimming when she was younger, like in um, high school and stuff. And so like my perception of sort of the ideal athletic body was formed by some of those sports, which in baseball and in swimming, the body types that you see are less like hulking, massive men, bowling through and over others. It's more of a either an all around sort of thing or kind of just like leaner toned sort of thing. So like I never had this like disconnect per se because like when I'm exercising well and eating well, like that kind of is how my body naturally sits. I'm a little bit tall and lean, so like mine kind of matched decently well enough, at least close enough that like I never had this like, wow, I don't look anything like the people that are good at baseball. Like um so I feel kind of fortunate in that way, but certainly I had a lot of insecurity as, I think a lot of mine stems from like in my high school years when I stopped being able to play baseball because it was too demanding on time. They wanted, I think when I went to high school, it was like you could make every day like half the day essentially like baseball practice. And it was just like, I have too many other interests. I'm not interested in baseball this much. Um, so I quit. And uh, for me, it was like, well, then I had the appetite of someone who exercised all the time. And a teenager appetite at that, and eventually that caught up with me. And just eventually someone's like, make teenagers are mean, as a group of people. Obviously, I know lots of teenagers who are very kind and nice people, but as a group, teenagers, there's a lot of cruelty that no adult would say to another, in normal settings to a stranger. And you get a lot of people who are making comments about uh, your body in ways that like stuck with me and like really made me self-conscious about stuff. So like I tend to be uncomfortable if I have a tight fitting shirt. Even if I'm decently in shape, it kind of makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, people can see the shape of my body and I don't want someone to comment on it. But like no one's commented on my body in years, that it doesn't change that insecurity that comes from a very early experience.
Yeah, and I think that brings us a little bit around full circle. We've both had a similar experience, and a lot of this being formed by other people's comments. And I think that brings us to an important keystone in doing better as we mentor kids and as we teach our own kids and raise our own kids and moving forward with this, making sure that we don't pass along this thing that we dealt with. And that is
Yeah.
just just not commenting on the bodies of children. Like, and I mean, and I say this as like a, well, it's the obvious thing, just don't do this. I think it's important to note that most of the adults that we grew up with weren't doing this maliciously. And
Oh yeah.
it happens. I have definitely, like we, I'm not giving out any identifying elements here, but a kid that I work with is 12 years old and almost like she's right at 6 foot. And it's definitely being that I work in a primarily basketball oriented space where I have a lot of basketball coaches who come through. It's a thing that is probably, I'm sure, especially in her presence, it's came up where I've remarked about her height. And well, I know it has because I felt bad about it immediately afterwards. And it's something I've kind of eaten myself up with. Like, I shouldn't remark, even though it's something that, like, we're both aware of. She's aware of it. I'm aware of it. The coach is aware of it. We all know, yeah, you're exceptionally tall for a 12-year-old. It's not good to have people remarking on your body like that. It messes with your head. Like, just don't remark on people's bodies. It's not something they can change. It's not something, well, especially for children. When we're talking about children, it's not something they have control over. Even if it is,
Right.
yeah, like even if it's a situation where they need to have adjusted diets, they don't have control over that. The adults in their life do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there are occasionally spaces. I mean, a doctor's office being the most obvious one, but like I'd say like even in like certain sports contexts where there are times when the advice you need to give someone is informed by their body, right? Like if you have really long legs, some of the things that you need to do to optimize certain techniques are slightly different. And I think in those kind of cases it's okay to say like, hey, uh you're really tall, so you need to keep in mind that when you know do this technique, you need to change it in this way because uh you know your legs affect it in a different way. Like I think what we're not saying is like t- people's bodies and how they're shaped are so taboo that no one should ever say anything about anyone ever. I think it's like it we need to be acutely aware that there's a lot of self-consciousness inherently tied up in one's own appearance and how they appear, especially since like that's going to always like without greater societal change, inevitably people are going to be bombarded with a lot of images and standards and stuff that are wildly unrealistic, informed by Photoshop. God for godforsaken Photoshop, freaking making everyone think that they got to like take inhuman poses where like their back would literally snap if they managed to get into that pose naturally. Like uh just outrageous type stuff. But like, you know, that given that that's the backdrop that you're working against, try to understand that people are going to be self-conscious about their appearance and their body, especially if it's a really obvious way of which they stand out. And just like, don't talk about it unless you have like a pragmatic reason to, and you are the person put in position of talking about that pragmatic issue. It's just like, don't, if you're just a friend, don't talk about it unless they're bringing it up and they're inviting you to talk about it.
Yeah.
Which is just basically a don't be an asshole rule.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, we say these things that make it sound like it's super easy, and I just want to clarify that it's we're all human, and it
Mhm.
is like it is even easy things. We make mistakes, and we do. It happens. The point of this isn't to find this purified version of yourself that exists out there and just become that. That's not how reality works. That's not how this works. The point is personal improvement, self betterment, realizing, these are some things I need to work on. These are some things I need to think of when I am uh, forming relationships with other people and when I am, uh, just talking with other people when I'm having, all the word is escaping me right now, but our interconnectedness with the people in our community. Yeah, here's some things we need to keep in mind, better ourselves on, and do better about in the future. And this is one of those. Like, just be aware of how your language comes off to kids. Because I feel very confident that if most of the older adults when I was a kid had just had bothered to, if they had, if they just did stop and think, or have the kind of conversations or awareness of how their words affected kids around them that they talked to, they wouldn't have said some of the things they said, because it was a pointless thing. It was just like it was small talk. It was a small talk thing that came up in conversation about, like, man, Thomas over there could really use some muscle on his bones. And like it's not ill meaning, but ill intent comes across. Just be careful.
Yeah,
Just
for sure. And there's a lot of this kind of stuff in sort of small talk discourse, if you will, of stuff like an example that comes to mind, and this touches on a completely different topic that I don't want to go down in this particular episode, but like, people will talk about like and often it's the same the same people that talk about how bad it is for two men to kiss at a McDonald's because it's sexualizing our children. Uh, will at the same time go up to children and be like, "Oh, is that your girlfriend?" And it's like, "What?" Like, um, basically just like, I don't know, have some awareness about like it can be hard in the sense of like, we're all used to hearing certain things as memes, um, but also, you know, be aware that it's not without consequence, and a lot of times those things do have an effect on people that you may not fully understand. And it's not because you're bad, it's just because like there are things that we have as small talk common things. Like sometimes you're going to be surprised. I'm like, wow, you're really tall. But, try to imagine being really tall for a minute and how annoying it probably is to have every single new person you meet go like, wow, you're really tall. Like, no kidding. Like, um, just to borrow a phrase from a YouTuber that I'm a fan of, John Green, one of the Vlog brothers, imagine others complexly, and you will find that there are some behaviors that you thought were innocuous that may be causing sort of just small bits of harm to people here and there that are good things to get out of your system.
yeah. So I think that wraps up everything I have to say about that one. Do we want to move on to safety?
Yeah, yeah. So listeners will, or I should say, savvy listeners will notice we are going slightly out of order here, saving the spice for the end.
Yes.
Uh, Also, I think um, my kids are too young, and perhaps this is not a topic that, as a mentor, you breach with your mentees terribly often. But
No. So it seemed like the safe move to make.
Yeah, was to move it to the end. Speaking of safety, uh, sorry. Um, yeah, what do you what are your thoughts around safety and mentorship?
I think this is a huge topic. And this is something very important, of course, to fatherhood too. I mean, anytime you're dealing with kids, like 99% of our interaction with kids is trying to keep them from hurting or killing themselves. And this is something we have to actively do. And I think our society has mostly came around to this. Like, I don't think I really need to teach and preach that, we need to make sure that everybody understands that, kids can't just be like left to roam free in the neighborhood to do whatever they want. It Safety is such a thing that is this ties directly to what we were talking about last episode, because I think this applies later on in adult life too, and it's part of the reason why we often kind of struggle with some of these concepts in modern society, where we're kind of sheltered from certain threats in our environment. Safety is something very specifically circumstantially acquired, as you talked about, like about not really understanding uh, the value of a bicycle helmet until you saw it crack in half on the sidewalk, and you're like, that could have been my skull. Like, I think safety is something that so commonly we don't conceptualize harm until we see harm, and children, by nature of being children, are very innocent to the world and to a lot of the harms that the world and our environment can befall us. And it's very important to teach that as best we can until they experience it. Because they can't just experience everything that the environment can harm them with. Like, it just doesn't work that way. Like, you can't harm them in every way the environment can, so that they know that's called child abuse.
Yeah, traumatization is not parenting.
So we have to teach elements of things, and this comes up all the time in in my what I do. Um, which is essentially childcare and a lot of mentorship stuff. And kids, all the way young and all the way old, will do things that are a dangerous, reckless activity. And I have to explain why it's a dangerous and reckless activity. And different tactics kind of have to be taken at different ages. I find with younger children, I take a lot of distractionary tactics. For instance, I've got a bunch of kids who really like to build fortresses out of things. They're kind of at that age level, I think, where that is a big element of their play sphere, which is something I'm super cool with. And I'm gonna get a little off topic in talking about this, but so like I'm one day in our rec center, I've got them like. I come around the corner and they're trying to build fortresses out of like folding tables. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do this. How about instead I bring out these gym mats? Because unlike a wooden 40-pound folding table, these are foam, and they cannot fall from a reasonable height and hurt you. Like, they're foam, you're fine. And so that worked great. They were immediately distracted by these way cooler playthings that were way more easily for them to handle, and they were happy. They didn't need to know why using the folding tables was dangerous. They weren't going to comprehend that anyways. I just distracted them with something else. Also, really great play stuff, because, and I'm just going to dive into this really shortly, they're at that time where they're like understanding how their environment around them works. And I think this is relevant to safety, that you're beginning to understand your environment and how to manipulate your environment. In this building of fortresses with these foam mats, I really noticed that it like starts off super rudimentary, as they don't really know how to manipulate these things. And as they keep doing it, it keeps getting more and more and more complex as they start understanding, oh, well, I can balance this on this, and it's going to be, oh, now the walls are too spread apart and it's going to fall over. Oh, this is wrong, it's going to fall over. Oh, this is wrong, the roof is going to cave in. Oh, I don't have anything on the floor, it's going to be uncomfortable. Like, they learn and make all these adjustments as they go. And this is a part of like learning, kind of, learning your environment and how to manipulate your environment on your own terms and in non-structured activity. I think is very important to building like a way of understanding your environment and maintaining safety. Sorry, I got a little off topic there. But with later age groups, I find different tactics work differently. I've found with some more middle aged, when I'm talking like later kids getting more into middle school, sometimes a lot of extreme literal language becomes more useful because their thinking is very literal. So if I'm very literal with them, they process it lightning fast. This can be like, oh, what do you mean? Why can't I like play in the skate park on like one of the four-wheel scooters? Well, because it's not designed for that. And if you fall on that concrete, it's going to break your leg and we're going to have to go to the ER and it's going to be a really bad day for you and me both. Oh, okay, no, I get that. I won't do that. Like that was maybe a bad example, but you get what I mean. It's certain literal, just be straightforward and honest. And if they trust you, they're going to trust you, and things move smoothly. Doesn't work as well with younger kids. Doesn't work as well with older kids. But it's just knowing I don't know, knowing your kids, knowing your age group.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. My perspective as a parent is slightly different in that kids have this unusual phenomenon where they for a while when they're very young, they basically do whatever you tell them to do within some degree of flexibility. Um, they will try to get away if they know they're not supposed to. Sometimes they'll try to get away with things, but in general, if you say like, "Hey, stop," they stop. At some point, this evolves into a point where you, as a human parent, have made an error at some point, and your child discovers, much to your chagrin, that sometimes you're wrong about stuff. And when that happens, your child decides that you are wrong about everything that they don't like, um, which makes for an interesting paradigm when it comes to safety education type stuff in particular, in that you will tell them, hey, stop stacking these cushions really high and jumping off of them. You're going to get hurt when you miss. And they ignore you, and then they do it, and then they get hurt when they miss, and then they cry. And you say, you simultaneously have to try to be compassionate and comfort them, and also tell them that that was very, very dumb, and you're also told not to do that, because they need to remember that next time, which they inevitably fail to do. So it it's a weird. I think actually, like, teaching safety to children is an incredibly deep well. So I'm going to try to keep this focused specifically on safety precautions when it comes to certain kinds of activities, and not safety as a whole. Because I think, for example, you mentioned whether or not it's safe to have kids wandering around the neighborhood alone. And I found very interesting information about that. There are definite, like, for example, there are cultures, I believe, in Switzerland, if I'm remembering correctly, getting this from secondhand information, so you're gonna have to forgive me. Uh, Children in elementary school will be let out for lunch. They will go to the local cafes and restaurants nearby, and they will have money, and they will go and buy their own lunch, and they will sit as little groups of 8-year-olds at a table or whatever, and eat lunch, and then go back to school when their lunch hour is over. So some of our attitudes about the safety of children going out and being independent in these ways is somewhat informed by like the fear culture of cable news, but that's an incredibly different topic that I don't want to get into. So setting that aside, I'm going to take that giant blob that I just brought into the conversation and now shove it away. And say specifically around, say, the thing we were talking about, where you're addressing the sort of cultural phenomenon of people thinking that they have to be a real man, they have to not be safe. I think when it comes to children, you just like always encourage them to take safety precautions. Like, don't let your kids not buckle their seatbelts. Don't let your kids not wear their helmets when they're riding a bike, whatever. Like, I mean, basic stuff that all, like, I would think goes without saying, but probably doesn't. Um,
It's not cool to be the cool uncle you had as a kid who was like, "Here, play with the fireworks. This will be awesome." Like,
yeah,
if you're gonna do that, also teach safety precautions.
yeah, for sure. Um, I'll say specifically the thing that I think is the most impactful as far as like addressing the particularly like male concern here of like not perpetuating a toxic masculinity trait of that, like, I don't need to be safe, that's how I know I'm a real man thing, is um don't tie um toughness to masculinity in your language with children. So what do I mean by this? um Kids hurt themselves in incredibly minor ways all the time and immediately burst into tears. And obviously, that's not a behavior that can continue into their teenage years and older. You have to teach them to be resilient, to be tough, uh, male or female child, right? Like, you have to be able to endure some degree of physical pain without collapsing into a sobbing ball. So that is a thing that you have to teach, but it's tempting to try to appeal, especially with children who sometimes can't really process the more complex reality that you're trying to communicate, to appeal to things that are simple and easy to understand. It's tempting when your child scrapes a knee and is crying to say, you gotta, you're a boy, you gotta be a man, tough it out, you know, not cry, get in here and just kind of be tough and get a band-aid on it and deal with it. Half of that advice is good, like being able to control your emotional outbursts, to go and get appropriate medical care for injuries that you sustain, and not letting your frustration and anger and sadness and pain control your actions is good. Those things should all be taught, but you don't need to inject them into a masculine identity, because they're just not. Those are useful skills for everyone to have. Like, anyone who scrapes their knee and it just like collapses to the ground sobbing is just not a functional adult. So, like, say, you know, emphasize that, yeah, you gotta be able to be tough, you gotta be able to be strong and power through and hold in your tears sometimes in order to get appropriate medical conditions, uh, you know, is an appropriate thing to teach. You just need to not try to appeal to these sort of more naive concepts in an attempt to get compliance out of your children. Um, it's sort of like a softer version of spanking in a way. If you look at the science around spanking, the science is very clear. It's harmful in the long term, but it gains short term compliance. Your kids will do what you say in the short term more often if you use that as punishment. But the problem is that it has long term effects of cruelty and violence as behaviors that they resort to. So you have to weigh, if you're ever going to use physicality with your children, how important is it that they actually listen to me right now? Are they about to crash a $500,000 item that is going to bankrupt your family if they break it and you have to pay for it? Okay, it's probably okay to slap their hand or grab them really hard or whatever. It it's not optimal, but it's certainly better than, some disaster befalling you. Your kid's about to run out into the road or something, get hit by a car. There are times to be physical with children. Um, but I think tying, injecting these sorts of things into their psyche has a similar effect. It's like, it's going to get you that they may be more willing to in the moment say like, okay, I'm going to be strong and be a man and tough it up. But in the end, that's going to get them some harmful behavior down the road. So I think you just have to weigh that and try to avoid using it unless it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you bring up a lot of things that I had I had not really realized or even thought of or processed because again, I'm not a father yet. um, yeah, I think you have a lot of validity there, and I mean, like one thing that does come to mind. I had a very young child a couple of weeks ago who we were having a Nerf battle. He was really too young to be involved in the Nerf battle, but he was. And he's like 4, and he got hit right smack in the nose, point blank, with a Nerf dart, and immediately started crying. And I swung in and slid up to him and checked him out and made sure, like, he was definitely okay. It just hurt. And was patting his back. I'm like, hey, you're all right. You're okay. And he kept like repeating, I'm like, no, I'm not okay. And that was, I think, and I might be wrong in my perception of this, but the way I was understanding the situation was that he's too young to fully, when you're young, when you're a kid like that, you don't understand how your body responds to everything. You don't have a large, catalog of pain memories to be like, I've had this pain before. This one's a serious one. I need to go to a doctor. Like, oh, nah, this one's nothing. I'm good. Like, you don't have that big catalog. You have a very little catalog. So everything, your brain, as your brain's kind of telling you, oh, no, 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 this is, I'm dead. I'm dying. This is severe. And so what he really needed was that reassurance. And that's what I did my best to give. Like, no, I promise you, you're fine. Everything's okay. You're going to be good. And I just stuck with him the whole way through it as he was crying and as he calmed down. I'm like, you're fine. You feeling better? No. Are you sure? Okay, well, that's cool. It's fine if you don't feel better right now, but you're going to be all right. I promise you, it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. And like, and saying I promise you you're gonna be fine, but not in like a scalding way, like, oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
fine, calm down. Like, no, in a honest, reassuring way. And he did. He eventually got there and he was cool. And then I could not get that kid to leave me alone the rest of the day. I had just gained a best friend. And and I think that's like a lot of times what, kids at that young age are needing. And we often like, I know the like knee jerk reaction I often got as a young kid was this like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry for, or man up, be a man about it.
Oh man.
And like all of these like aggressive, knee jerk, reactionary movements to it that accomplished not the thing that needed to be accomplished, which was getting me to calm down. It definitely, screaming at somebody doesn't make them calm down. And it didn't accomplish the thing that it sought out to accomplish, which was to instill this idea of toughness being masculinity. Didn't instill that into me. It really didn't. Like, it doesn't, that's not how it just doesn't work that way. Um,
Yeah, for sure. And it's always hard, like in these kind of cases, because sometimes like you're jumping into a situation where, especially as a parent, where like you hear your child scream, and of course you have all the panic associated with that, and you run in and you come to find out that they're screaming because they didn't get uh they couldn't reach the toy that they wanted or something. And like those moments are like, it's very hard to make optimal parenting decisions, because like you're going through your own emotional roller coaster and your brain is like thinking that your child's about to die, and then like going like, oh, never mind, it was something really stupid. And then being annoyed at the child for being stupid, but then having to remember that the child is too young to not do stupid things, and like having to go through all those cycles all while processing your own emotional state. It's hard. It's very, very hard.
it
And
is.
I certainly do not do it optimally every time.
Yeah. And I mean,
But
and that's again, though, the whole point of what we're trying to do and say here is like, yeah, this isn't about reaching some perfect point. Like, I just
right.
said all of that about what I did with that kid. I promise when I have my own kid, there is going to be one day where it's going to be exactly like what you described. I'm going to hear screaming. It's going to register in my brain as, oh, that's the pain scream. And I'm going to go in there, all senses on 11, and it's going to be something stupid. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? You are fine. Stop crying. And like, yeah, we're humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's the point is gradual improvement and trying to do better, because you'll never,
Yeah.
if you don't recognize it's a problem, you'll never do better.
And I'll say real quick that when a lot of these things, one thing I'll say is um, there's a phenomenon called the curse of knowledge, which is a people that have deep knowledge and experience in a particular thing, once they've gained a sufficient amount of it, will lose perspective, uh, uh, and fail to be able to understand what the experience of not knowing that thing is like. Um, it's why sometimes people who are like super, super, super educated in a particular field sometimes are the worst teachers of it, because they don't know how to present the topic to people that don't already know a ton about it. And this is actually why a lot of parents struggle to teach their kids certain things, myself included, because you forget what it's like to not know how to handle bonking your knee on a table, how not know how to handle scraping your elbow. Like, you forget what it's like to not have a giant catalog of references for what kinds of pain are serious and what kinds of pain are just like annoying and will go away. And it's hard to remember that your 4-year-old is does not know that the pain in his nose is going to go away. They do not know that. That to them, like, it's very possible their nose will feel like this forever. Now, they don't necessarily have all the kind of modeling that they're like really thinking like 50 years, my nose is going to be in pain one day. Like I will, like it's not super dramatic like that either. It's just like they feel really bad and they don't have that certainty that that's going to go away anytime soon. And it feels really bad and they want someone to make it stop, and they're just upset and they don't know how to process it. And like this pattern goes all the way back to actual infancy. And I will quote one of my favorite quotes from John Green, who I've mentioned already today, that babies have two modes. They have, I am ecstatically happy and things could be better. And when things could be better, they do one thing, and it's cry. and and that is just the thing you're talking about, the Nerf dart in the nose, is exactly the same thing with just a little bit more information. um, and that's an experience they'll have to formulate their experience going forward, that will help them in the future learn that, okay, it does go away. I remember I got hit in the nose. This sucks. It's unpleasant, but it did went away, especially after I calmed down. Calming down made it go away faster. And you know, you have that experience of it.
Agreed. Now,
Well,
moving on to another topic where we often struggle to remember what it was like before we knew about it. Um, Sex and pornography. I think a lot of us, well, and actually, and I'm where I'm going to go with this is going to be even a little bit deeper than that, talking about the idea of like the moving target of pornographic media specifically, because like what I had to, what my dad had to deal with for the moving target of pornographic media and explaining it to your kids was very different than what his dad had to deal with, and will be very different from what I'll have to deal with, because technology moves so fast today. I mean,
mm-hmm.
like, not in like, I don't mean like, right now. I mean, as in like, the differences in technology over a lifetime. Like, if I have a kid tomorrow, somehow, magically, one just pops out tomorrow, I've got 14 years of technological development before I get to whatever I have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we often fall into this kind of category of, specifically, I think a problem that happens in this, and I think this is important to lead into as we're talking about this, is there are a lot of people who want to tell parents, hey, I have the one magic thing that you need to know or do to handle this brand new experience that you are arriving at for the first time. For my parents, this was the brand new concept of kids on the internet. And this was a very scary thing for them at the time. It's something we're kind of normalized to now, but at the time, in the early 2000s and the MySpace days, the idea of kids just existing on the internet was terrifying and nobody knew how to deal with it. When my dad was a kid, it was probably the concept of kids having access to VHS tapes and nobody knowing how to deal with that. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a moving target. And that's, when I have kids, it's probably going to be like VR suites, kids having access to like VR dating suites. How are we going to, this is so much to unpack. And there are never going to be anybody out there who has a magic bullet for how you need to deal with that as a parent. There is no easy answer to it. There is no, the magical thing that we all just need to know and do because it's a new problem. And when you're facing a new problem, there are no immediate, obvious, easy solutions, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, that is absolutely true. And that was something I was going to say as well, is like, this is a hard one because in thinking about it, the the in talking about like how to and I will go ahead and say, like, my kids are young enough right now that this is largely a theoretical construct in my mind. So I'm going to be light on pragmatic, applied knowledge here, and seeing where my approach has succeeded and failed. But that said, my thoughts on it are one of recognizing that my parents had no idea, I'm sure, what to do with the internet in general. And while I have some idea what to do with the internet, it certainly wasn't as accessible or easy or searchable as it is now. Um, and I think the landscape is always going to be changing around that too. And so, yeah, there's always going to be some unknowns. I don't think it, it it will at least be a while before we get to a point where the way that these things exist is crystallized and we can start getting well practiced good solutions around how to introduce children to X. Though here's the thing, I don't hold a whole lot of optimism that that's ever going to happen. Even if all technology stopped developing right now, like sex developed something like billions of years ago and has existed for the entirety of human history. And we still don't have a good, clean way of talking about sex universally across humanity. So let's not pretend like we're all going to have like a super comfortable, easy conversation about porn with our children. And they're going to be like, yeah, I like this. This is great. It feels very open and honest and no one's uncomfortable. Like, I think when it comes to this and children, the best thing I've come to is you're going to be, as a parent, you're going to be uncomfortable. As a kid, they're probably going to be uncomfortable. Like, everyone's going to be uncomfortable, but it's more important that you just acknowledge that and push through it, because it's very important that you talk about this openly and honestly, because it is way too dangerous and volatile to leave them to explore it on their own. And frankly, as a parent, you're not going to understand everything that they're going to find. Like, my parents did not understand the breadth of internet and how it would change, and like chat rooms, for example, are a great example of this. Like, I mean, how many like weird predatory people have existed in chat rooms and stuff, and like kids were just like in there freely like, I mean, everyone in my age at least remembers the ASL days of chat rooms where everyone's just freely being like, oh, I'm this old, this is my sex, and this is where I live. And you're like, nowadays in 2021, it's like, wow, that was really stupid. And yeah, it was really stupid, but no one had any idea what was going on. Like, man, and it's going to be just like that. It is just like that right now. There is something that kids are doing that when they are adults, they will turn around and go like, wow, that was really obviously stupid. And I can't believe anyone let us get away with that, because no one knew what they were doing. And I think the best thing that you can do is just it's similar to teaching your kids to approach learning about more complicated issues in general, which is I don't think that you're like, I think most parents want to have this like clean ideology or clean messaging that they can just like package up and say, here's what to believe this, and move forward. And that's a lot easier to do as well. Um, because you can just say, this is the absolute truth, believe it, believe me, I'm an adult. Um, a lot harder to do, but something that I try to do is instead equip them with tools that will give them what they need to evaluate things going forward. And they will misapply those tools at a young age, but you keep trying to show them how to use them and whatnot. So my thought about how I will approach this eventually is something to the effect of around the same time we have the conversation, after, or I should say, after the time the birds and bees talk, right, has had time to settle and fully integrate into my children's view of the world. My plan is to sit down and have another conversation of like, okay, now you've probably started to experience some things about your body changing. We need to talk about the fact that certain changes that are occurring make certain things feel really nice, and how that's going to interact with stuff, and what you're going to need to know about what's out there, and how to approach it in a healthy way as best we know what a healthy way is. And it's like, and in imagining that conversation, I am already deeply uncomfortable, but I think about it enough to try to be ready to accept that comfort and approach it anyway, because I owe it to my kids to try to give them the tools that they need to approach these kinds of media better than what I had. And just continuing to try to do that incremental improvement thing, because I think the best thing I can do is get them to realize that this, whatever you find on the internet, is absolutely not a model of how things should be or are, and B, that this is something that can be a big problem if you overindulge, if you start really expecting it to be the way that your life is going to pan out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think I think you're very right, and especially in the idea of like, yeah, teaching these kind of core concepts that will eventually apply, because like, to use an example, my parents, and I'm gonna yeah, my parents had no way of knowing or expecting that I would eventually stumble across casting couch porn on the internet when I became older. But what they were able to do was instill values and capabilities of processing the world so that I was immediately able to recognize this is either actually exploitative and abusive, or this is mimicry of exploitative actions and abuse. And this is not okay. This is problematic material, and move on from that. While not everybody had that framework of perceiving those certain specific genres of pornography. Um, and I'm just using that as a very specific example, but yeah, and I think that falls in the line of like the same kind of thing. And then, similarly when you're talking about like chat room things, I got into chat rooms, and yeah, neither of my parents. My dad at least. Well, and at the time I was living with my dad. He was kind of single fathering. He definitely had no real like understanding of chat rooms. And I had gotten into a conversation with a girl who was from Canada, ended up talking on the phone with her a lot, and had no concept of international phone charges, and just dropped a nuclear bomb on his phone plan. And he's like, "Why have you been spending hours talking to a phone number in Canada?" And then I had to explain this whole situation. He was very confused about it. Um, and I mean, it's like, things like that of like, well, I mean, I guess not really that in specificity. That was like, I still know who this person is today. I know they were not like a creepy dude on the internet. This was a real human being. But my parents did instill the kind of coping and processing structures that I needed to understand when I was having an interaction with somebody on the internet to be like, "Ooh, there's something up with this." And I didn't know exactly what it was because a lot of the terms and process and ways of processing like predatory behavior on the internet hadn't been invented yet at that time. This was a wild west of the internet era, but I had the type of framework to understand when somebody was trying to predate me or to manipulate me. I had the framework to understand when I was like being targeted for something that I knew there's a problem here. I need to back off and I need to like be aware of my surroundings, kind of a thing. Um, those frameworks, teaching those frameworks to your kids, because you're not going to be able to control what they're exposed to. There's literally no, especially in in any day's world, at no time in history did parents truly have full control over what their kids were exposed to. The
And they shouldn't.
world's, yeah, no,
I
they
want to be
shouldn't.
clear. They shouldn't.
No,
It would not be a better world if I could control everything that my kid saw. I don't have that kind of judgment call. Like, yeah, I think recognizing that you're going to have to gradually let go of your children is very important to their healthy development.
yep. Well, that pretty much wraps up everything I have to hit on this week.
Yeah, same. It's a weird one, and I'm very curious what my perspective will like this will be in approximately like 5 to 7 years, um, when my oldest is approximately the age to address some of these things and really start like, I mean, safety is one thing, but porn and body image are things that are more afflictions of the older breed of children, and so yeah, I'll be interested to see what some practical experience teaches me about this in the modern era. But yeah,
I agree completely. Um, So, yeah, as always, thank you all for joining us this week. We have a YouTube channel that this podcast is being released onto in audio format only, though, because, yeah, we're not doing video. Um, I record from inside my closet. We're not doing video.
if you
Uh,
want us to do video, drop a comment, hit that
yes.
like button.
Well, as soon as we
Other
get
obnoxious things to say about social media.
Yes, as soon as we get to 100,000 likes and 50,000 comments, we will go video.
Wow, man, you're expensive.
That's when like I can afford makeup, so that's when we're doing it.
Oh, okay, okay. I don't think makeup's that expensive, man.
I mean, I don't know.
I mean, we can ask our wives. I'm sure they have
Yeah.
some experience. Like,
Uh, but yeah, that's yeah, so we're on YouTube now. We're of course everywhere where podcasts can be found. You can follow me individually on Twitter. I'm at HandgunsPod on Twitter. Um, you can follow us on Facebook at our Facebook page, which is Molding Masculinity, just as it is here. And a special shout out this week because I'm about to release the brand new graphics for all of our social media pages and everything else. And that is a shout out to the good Chad, who has handled all of our graphic design, is a fantastic individual that I have known from way back. And I really recommend you go check out his Instagram page and just everywhere else. He's on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. Well, actually, I don't think he's on Twitter, but everywhere else he is at. The good Chad, fantastic person doing fantastic work out there.
I am so excited for our graphic stuff. It's chef's kiss, just perfect. I'm loving it, and yeah, definitely go check it out.
Thank y'all. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever time of day it is. Thanks.